My name is Alex, and welcome to Paranormal Artist, the podcast where I talk about hauntings and the supernatural. Listener discretion is advised. This audio may not be suitable for children. So, on a normal day, I would just say, on today's adventure, we're going to insert location. However, I've had a tragic event happen, and I lost every piece of data and note I had for the place I was going to talk about this week. And yes, I was mad. I shut my computer off for a while. And it's funny now, but it was definitely not funny when it happened. I was so mad. But, you have to pick up the pieces and just keep moving. So, with all that being said, today I'm coming at you with some stories from Reddit. And these stories creep me out. I love stories from Reddit. I think they're they're pretty unhinged sometimes. And I think that they would be a pretty good replacement for what I was going to talk about on this episode for this week. I guess without fucking further conversation, here are the stories that I have found from Reddit. I, 29 female, am in the final stages of purchasing an old farmhouse. It's a humble 100-year-old house on 157 acres in rural northern Canada. It's a 3-hour move from my current place, which I had to unfortunately leave due to a physically abusive relationship. This area stood out to me as it's relatively close to where my grandparents lived and farmed. It's perfect and everything I want in a home. Yesterday, I had a tour of the property with the current owner who has lived there for the last 10 years. The house has 2 doors, and when I asked why he doesn't use the side door that has a large mudroom, he casually mentioned that his daughter, early 20s, is scared of the basement. Jokingly, I said, "What, is there ghosts?" To which he replied, "Yes, actually there is." My next question was, "Are they good or bad?" And he reassured me they were good. He then told me he sees a man downstairs sometimes, and occasionally sees him walking outside towards the shop. There's a woman that spends her time in the kitchen when he sees her. He has never seen the children, but he often hears them playing outside. I asked if there was any family tragedy that occurred on the property, and he said that the only story he knows was of the original owners who built and homesteaded there, lost a child at a young age, and because it was winter, they had to store him in the cistern in the basement for the winter until the ground was thawed. I didn't have any negative feelings in the house. I did feel a sense of comfort, but I've also had bad energies in a house previously, so I can't lie and say I'm not a little nervous. A good friend of mine is a clairvoyant, and I brought it up to her. She assured me that they are not harmful spirits, and they have attachments to their first home. She said she sensed they liked me. She went on to say that the current owner advised me of them out of respect for them. There are no disclosure laws of haunted houses where I live, and as long as I live with respect to them, everything will be good. Is there anything I should be mindful of when moving in? Anything I should do? Any kind of smudge or anything I should put in the home? I've heard not to put a mirror facing my bed, and I'm just wondering if there's anything else I can do. I don't want to push them away, but I don't want to open myself to anything negative either. This really is a first for me, purposely moving into a place with known entities living in it. I will say I live alone for the majority. I have dogs and cats and a new boyfriend who seems to be a little uneasy about this news. However, my mantra the last few months has been, I am capable of anything. I got out of an abusive relationship that should have killed me, and here I am. I have been living my life with a newfound empowerment, so I feel confident I can get through anything life throws at me. Yeah, that's pretty scary, mainly because it's a fucking separated farmhouse from, the rest of society. I couldn't do it. Personally, I would probably just be scared 24/7, ghosts or not. dogs or not, it wouldn't matter. I'd be scared because there's like literally nothing out there. Granted, the nights would be nice because you don't have the, I guess, city lights everywhere and you'd be able to actually see the stars. But that's like small stuff in comparison to actually wanting to live out in this fucking farm. I wouldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Props to those of you who are able to do it because it's too dark, it's too quiet, and I've seen horror movies. No thank you. I just realized that I don't even know. I think I'm just overly tired from the time change and shit just isn't working out the way I want it to. Hopefully things will get better, but for the moment I am feeling completely vulnerable and, I've been having a lot of nightmares lately, but that's okay, right? We all have nightmares. When I was 12, I had a friend. His name was Jay. He was 14. He was my cousin's good friend. I was just starting to become good friends when this started. He was an eccentric person. He was very into medieval times, and we would talk like them sometimes. Because of that, he didn't have many friends. I don't mind. I found him funny. He was also huge into botany. He would often go into the woods and study plants, finding edible ones and non-edible ones. I went with him a few times. Every single time he would have his dog. It was a Jack Russell Terrier. He also wore a specific orange hoodie with his last name on it. Just a bit info on him. I remember the night before, I could have sworn I heard ambulances rushing nearby. The day of, I was supposed to go to my cousin's house. It was about a 25-minute walk, or 10 minutes by bike. There was a clearing with a very small entry to the woods. Jay liked using that way to enter. When I'm about 50 yards away, I see him in his orange sweater and his dog walking into the entry. I yelled his name, but he never looked up. I eventually got to the opening and again saw him and yelled his name. He never turned and kept walking. Not even his dog, and that dog loved me. I was going to follow him but felt lazy, so I went straight to my cousin's house. When I get there, he wasn't home, and his stepdad opens the door. He tells me my cousin isn't home and breaks the news that Jay was in an accident. Apparently, he was coming back from being in the woods later than usual and was hit by a drunk driver on his way home. He didn't die immediately, but died a few hours later from his injuries. His dog died immediately. I called my cousin and he confirmed it. I was shocked and never told anyone what I saw. I always kept that doubt with me. He lived with his grandmother, and I'll never forget her at the funeral. I miss that kid. He never bothered anyone, and everyone left him alone while he did his botany stuff. Edit. Jay was not his real name. Fake name. That was incredibly sad. I have also had some weird stuff like that happen after losing a relative. I know that this person was not a relative to them, but they were close to them. Whenever I've had relatives die, I would often hear like their voice. When my grandpa died way back in 2011, we were all sitting outside of his hospice room where he was spending his last few days of life. And he said my grandma's name loud and plain as day. Some of us heard it. Some of us didn't hear it. Some of us did. I remember hearing it. Crystal clear, plain as day. This man was in a coma. He was unable to speak, but he said my grandma's name loud as can be. And recently, actually more recently, my grandma passed, and we were all sitting in the living room when she also said something. When my aunt was leaving her house, she goes, "Love you." And, those of us that were sitting in the living room heard it. And we were shook because that was definitely a voice that came out of nowhere. And it was right next to my ear pretty much, but loud, like how I'm talking to you guys, loud. So it's possible that somebody could in fact see the spirit of somebody that they were close to, or hear them, or really anything. Even back in 2004, when my other grandpa died, it was pitch black outside, still nighttime, everybody's asleep. I remember this because I woke up because I was fucking scared. I heard my name get called by a man, and I recognized the voice. It was my grandpa, or I believe it was. Some spirits have the ability to mimic voices. I believe it was my grandpa. He said my name, gave me whatever last message it was that was to be given. Everybody was asleep. I remember because I was so terrified that I just heard a voice while I was asleep. That is scary. So things like this, I believe, do happen to people, that they can hear the voices of loved ones that have passed on, or even see the spirits of the person who passed on, like a full-bodied apparition like that. It's tragic, but it's cool, and it helps support the theory that there is life after death. Does that make sense? I think what I meant to say is that there's an afterlife. It's really sad to like see people like that. I'm sure that I'm not the only person, and clearly this person who had put this story on Reddit is not alone when it comes to this. I think that it's really interesting to know that some places, some people do indeed have like last things to do, like an unfinished business. And I think my dad actually told me that his grandma showed up to him whenever he was out of the country and he was in the military, way back in the 80s. I don't remember the story exactly, but he said that he saw her standing beside his bed that day that she passed away, which is intriguing to me, that it's kind of like a little family ordeal we have going on. I can't say the same for my mom. She's never really told me that she's experienced anything like that, but my dad and I talk about paranormal stuff all the time. We've all had experiences. We've all seen something. I've definitely heard the voices of my grandparents who have passed away. I would hope that I don't see their apparition, because I'm pretty sure I would have a stroke right there. You know, the sad, it's just so sad, that story. And drinking and driving, just please don't do it. It's not good for anybody. It's not good for you. It's not, obviously not good for the victim if you hit anybody. Just stay sober. Don't be stupid. Don't pick up your keys. If you have to stay somewhere, please stay somewhere. Don't get in your car when you're completely drunk, because you can take somebody's life who clearly doesn't deserve it, like this kid from the story who's still barely in the prime of his life. It's just better to stay somewhere where you can relax and sober up and maybe stay the night. Especially, you know, if you go to the bar, I get it. But we have things like taxis, Ubers, Lyft. We have sources now where you don't have to put your life or somebody else's life at risk. So just don't drive drunk. I know it's probably, you know, oh, I can't leave my car there, or this, I can't do that, or I can't do this. Just find a designated driver, somebody you trust, somebody who doesn't drink. Just find somebody. Be responsible, and don't drive drunk or buzzed or whatever, because it's just, why are you going to do that to innocent people? And why are you going to put yourself at risk? Even if you're going through some fucking horrible thing, why are you going to put yourself at risk? Just sober up, get an Uber, get a taxi, get whatever, and get home safely without hurting anybody or yourself. Please. Hey everyone, it's time for Paranormal Story of the Week. This took place in early 2000s, maybe 2004, in an apartment I lived in with my parents and my brother. Before I tell the story, let me just describe what my room looked like. It's relative to the story. My room was pretty basic. Imagine a square. On the bottom of the square is the entrance to the room, and to the left, on the same wall, is a built-in closet with mirrored doors. On the left wall is a daybed style bed. It looked like a fancy couch. On the top wall is the window covered with Venetian blinds. the cheap colored aluminum ones. I always close the blinds when I go to sleep. They were in the down and closed position, and the room was rather dark, important to note. On the right wall is my computer desk and some shelves. When I would lie in bed, my head would be towards the windows and my feet towards the closet. I can see the windows from the closet mirror when I look towards my feet. Alright, so to the story. It was an early Saturday morning, back in early 2000 something, and my mom comes into my room and places the cordless phone, remember those, near my bed. Why? I hear you ask. It's because the answering machine we have is not good enough for her, so she needs me to answer the phone when she's not home. Makes total sense. My mom places the phone near my head and tells me she's going out with my dad and to answer the phone if it rings. Me, barely conscious of her even talking to me, grunt my assent and go back to sleep. Around 10 o'clock that morning, the phone rings. It's my friend. Let's call her Jenny. She had a bad habit of calling me every Saturday at 10 a.m. to wake me up because she's bored. No matter how many times I ask her not to call me so early, as it was my only day off during the week and I'd like to sleep in. She still called every Saturday at 10 a.m. I groggily answer the phone, and this is the short conversation we had. Me, hello, sort of. Jay, way too cheerful. Hey, how's it going? What are you doing? Do you want to meet up? Me, after a few seconds to realize who I'm talking to. I'm sleeping. Jay, come on, let's meet up. I'm bored. Do you want me to come pick you up? Me, still mumbling. Give me a bit of time. I'll fully wake up and I'll call you back. Jay, okay. Don't take too long. I'm bored. Me, I hang up, roll over, and fall asleep. For about 5 seconds. That's when the room floods with light and the sound of whoosh. I open my eyes and look down towards the mirror at my window, and the blinds are now open. You know how Venetian blinds have one string for pulling the blinds up and another stick thing that you twist in order to open and close the shutters? Well, the shutters were open in a blink of an eye. Just whoosh, and they were open. I jumped to a sitting position instantly with my arms over my head as if I'm being held at gunpoint, blinking the bright daylight suddenly streaming in through the window, screaming to an empty room, okay, I'm up, damn it. I picked up the phone and called Jenny, and fully awake now, I said, I'm ready, you can come pick me up now. She said, great. I'll call you when I'm downstairs. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I told her, don't worry about it. I'll be there waiting already. I changed clothes at the speed of light and ran out of my room and downstairs, and spent the next 15 minutes smoking furiously until Jenny arrived. Later that day, when I got back home, I calmed down enough to see what the fuck happened to my blinds. I mean, if they were open and they fell down, I'd blame gravity or the cheap string that held them together. But they were opened in a blink of an eye. They went up against all knows physics and forces of nature. They went up. I know the blinds were down beforehand because I had already been woken up twice prior to that happening, and the room was rather dark. Usually to open the shutters, you take the stick thing and twist it about 20 times to get them fully open. I never, and I mean I never, was able to open them that fast myself. I even put the stick thing between my palms and tried rubbing them really fast in one direction to get them to open that fast, but no, it didn't work. It only opened a small fraction at a time. The stick thing doesn't open the blinds that easily. It's been around 20 years since that day, and I still can't figure out what the fuck. I guess it was a friendly spirit who knew that I would sleep for a few hours more and make Jenny just wait and wait. Also, more likely, she'd have called me back a few times, and I'd hang up each time with a promise to get up just in order to fall asleep again. An accurate description of what would probably have happened. They know me so well. LOL. So the spirit decided to save us both the trouble and just wake me the fuck up. Maybe the walls between realities or space time or whatever was thin that day or in that apartment. And so in one reality, I went back to sleep, while in the other parallel reality, I actually got out of bed and opened the blinds and went on with my day. I really don't know. This is not the only poltergeist activity that has happened in that room. I'll write about the other experience next week entitled My Third Poltergeist Activity. I used to sleep with a nightlight on as I became scared of the dark after a bunch of experiences. I was in my early 20s. That day made me realize that ghosts or spirits don't need darkness in order to haunt or interact with you. That's kind of wild. I've actually had poltergeist activity happen to me also. I feel like I've had an experience for pretty much every single one of these stories that I've done. Because there's somehow, with the exception of the USS Lexington, there's always something that comes up that's like, oh, I've had that happen. And in this case of the poltergeist activity, I did have a couple things happen. The first one, I was at home. I was taking a shower, and the shower curtain just got pulled open, like with a force. I think I was alone at that time. There wasn't anybody in the house, but I know for a fact that shower curtain just pulled up. It didn't open. It just pulled like outwards, like somebody pulled the curtain up. That scared the shit out of me. Not gonna lie. That was absolutely terrifying, especially when you're naked and you're like, you're just in an entirely vulnerable position. And when the shower and you don't see anybody, like nobody came in, nobody was there. It was just me taking a shower. And the curtain just goes, boop, opens up. That was fucking scary. I won't forget that day. And the other time that I've had an experience with poltergeist activity was when I was working at this store called Tuesday Morning. I was in one of the aisles. I think I was straightening up or something. Can't really remember the whole situation, but I was definitely in the aisle that is to the far left of the building as you walk in. And I was a couple shelves away from where this happened, but still within like a close enough range to see it happen. And a lid to one of those like tin boxes, you know, like a storage box, the lid just popped off and flew off the shelf onto the floor. And I was like, there's no way that just happened, because I just put that up there. The lid was secure. There's no way it could have popped off, lifted up, and dropped to the floor just like that. It was like somebody grabbed it and just threw it with rage. And I think that building is haunted. In fact, I think other former employees had said that they have experienced some weird stuff in that building. But that's definitely a day, because there was a customer that was further up in the aisle, and she looked at me, I looked at her, and we were kind of both in disbelief that we just saw this happen. I think she was walking towards where I was, and I'm just standing there like I was just minding my own business. And the lid pops off and drops, just like that. Now, every time I had gone into that building to open it for the morning or whatever, I always had like a creepy feeling in there. And I still get a creepy feeling when I do go into that store, which is very, 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 very rarely. It still creeps me out to this day. But I won't forget that time either. And I'm trying to think if there was another time, because I've had so many weird things happen. Those two are definitely the core memories of like poltergeist activity. And for those of you who don't know what poltergeist is, it's, God, how do I explain it? A ghost or other supernatural being supposedly responsible for physical disturbances such as loud noises and objects thrown around. Yeah. There are definitely such things as those. There's actually a house in California. It's called the Winchester Mystery House. And I think from what I remember, that place is pretty much known for poltergeist activity. But I can't believe a ghost would try to wake you up. Unbelievable. That's rude. That's just straight up like, we don't have enough time to sleep as it is. And here's Mr. Ghost over here like, ooh, wake up. I'm going to open your blinds for you. If that happened to me, there'd be an exorcism happening like the next day. Not even the next day. I'd probably like pull some strings and be like, hey, I need this now because this is disturbing my sleep. But lucky for me, I guess I've never had a ghost that was wanting to wake me up from a sleep. Although I have had some weird experiences with always waking up around 3:30 in the morning. For those of you who know me, I have insomnia. It's hard for me to fall asleep. It's hard for me to stay asleep. If I don't take any sleep medicine, then I'm definitely not sleeping that night. So I take sleep medicine every single day. And there are days where I'm out cold, super knocked out, probably wouldn't wake up to anything. And I'll just wake up like nothing. It's 3:30 in the morning and I wake up out of a dead fucking sleep. And there's really like honestly no explanation. However, I have looked up why I wake up at this hour, and it says that when you wake up suddenly out of a sleep and it happens to be around that time, and this could be just like a misinterpretation or whatever, they say that there's somebody watching you. So somebody is watching me while I'm sleeping, and I'm not very comfortable with that. Yeah, that's kind of creepy. I think that's funny though. It happens more often than it needs to, that I wake up like that. Like sometimes I'll be so tired that I have to, like, I will fall asleep at like 10:30, maybe 11, and I'll be completely asleep and just out of nowhere just wake up fully awake. And sometimes I'll wake up with like a panic, like you're having a nightmare, but you're not having a nightmare, but you just wake up and there's like, you have that feeling that something's right there in front of you. And I have that happen so often, and just, dear Jesus, it's pretty scary to wake up and it's pitch black and you don't see anything, but you know that you're awake for whatever reason. So sometimes when that happens, I'll just stay up until like 4 o'clock in the morning or 4:30 or later because I'm too scared to go back to sleep. And I know I've said it. I will go back and see what scared me. But when you're dreaming and you're asleep and you know for a fact that it's just you by yourself, you don't know exactly where to look because A, you don't want to look, and B, it's pitch black. If there's anything in your room, there shouldn't be, and I'm not trying to look or have like true crime happen to me. So with all that being said, I've started locking my door at night because I'm actually scared. And even though this is happening inside of my room, I'm genuinely terrified. And I'm trying to think of like, I know that's completely off topic for like that stuff, but it's goofy that something like that would happen. But the lid falling off that tin, that's definitely a spooky one. I'm trying to think because there's so much shit that's happened in my life that I think, yo, I've experienced that too. But for sure, the shower curtain and the lid falling off of the tin that I had near me at Tuesday morning was definitely the core memory of the poltergeist activity I've experienced. Oh my god, I'm trying to think if there's more, but I don't think there really is. Not that I know of. Not that I can think of at the moment, at least. I lived in an apartment in this old house in New Orleans. I lived with my boyfriend at the time, and we got this insane deal on a beautiful apartment. It was $600 to rent a massive, stunning apartment with hardwood floors and huge ceilings. My boyfriend worked in the oil field and would go offshore often, leaving me alone. 99% of the things would happen when I was alone. One day, I got out of the shower and the mirror was fogged up. I leaned over while I was brushing my teeth, and when I looked up, the mirror was wiped in a circle where my face was. That happened a few times. It was wiped away where my face was when I looked up from brushing my teeth each time. Only a handful of times out of the few months that I lived there. But when it did happen, it happened the same way every time. While I was sleeping, I often heard things crashing and also often heard footsteps in the attic. My boyfriend also heard the steps in the attic and went to check it out. No one was up there. I came home from getting groceries, put them on the gas stove, and got a feeling of being watched, and looked up. From the 2 to 3 seconds of me coming in and putting the groceries down, I looked up, and all of the cabinets were suddenly open 90 degrees. I closed the doors and tried to recreate it happening, which it couldn't. I brushed it off, went back to put the groceries away, got another creepy feeling, looked up, and all the cabinet doors were open again at a perfect 90-degree angle. While my back was turned, looking at the cabinets, all of the burners turned on full blast. Every night, we heard footsteps of someone walking slowly in high heels up and down the hallway for hours. The apartment next to us was a mirror image of ours, and the walls were thin. My boyfriend thought the guy next to us had a lady over, and I said, no woman wears high heels on hardwood floors walking back and forth. They would have taken them off. Only a man who has a fetish to wear heels would do that. Turns out our neighbor worked as a nurse during the night shift and wasn't home anyway. I was going to sleep one day, but I was scared, so I left the hallway light on. I heard the footsteps and was too scared to sleep. I looked up and saw an evil being, a man, but he looked like half man, half monster, walk into the doorway of the room, stop, and turn towards me. I had never been so scared, was paralyzed in fear. He came into the room, stood at the left side of the bed, and sat down. I felt like I was being electrocuted the entire time he looked at me. It felt like eternity. I think I passed out from fear. Been there. I woke up in the morning and panicked. I felt like it happened, but kept trying to convince myself that it was a nightmare. One night, my boyfriend and I were watching a movie in the dark. We heard the sound of wood floor creaking, and we both looked over to see an evil-looking, older, ugly woman glaring at us. We both looked at each other. I knew by looking at him that he saw it too. That was the day that I went from thinking I was paranoid to living in full fear. Here's the most terrifying part. Our dishwasher broke, and these handymen came to install the new one. One of the guys says to the other, "Hurry up, I hate being in this apartment." I asked him to explain why, and he said he'll only talk to me outside. He said that a serial killer lived in the apartment and killed women who were all the same age, who looked similar in the French Quarter. Trigger warning. He was a cross-dresser and walked up and down the hallway in heels. The FBI found a headless body and searched the entire property for the head and never found it. They looked in the attic and found traces of him living up there at some point. If you're curious, 2835 General Pershing, New Orleans, Louisiana. I tried to look up news stories online, but haven't had any luck. Maybe someone here is a better sleuth. So I looked up the house. It definitely doesn't look like a serial killer would have been there. It's actually, pretty cute. I like it. I would live there, ghost or not. But I don't know how I would feel about hearing heels constantly, but the house itself is pretty cute. I think that you wouldn't even know it was haunted if you were not into that stuff. I mean, obviously you would experience it, but for the most part, it definitely doesn't look like it's haunted. In fact, I'm curious to know if this person has found any other information on this alleged murder and serial killer. From what I'm looking at, I don't see anything. I haven't, just people commenting, wait a minute. The Axeman of New Orleans. Oh, I think we found it. So he was supposedly called the Axeman of New Orleans. It says on Wikipedia that he was unidentified, active in New Orleans and surrounding communities. He was active from May of 1918 to October of 1919. He was never identified and apparently mainly targeted Italian immigrants and Italian Americans. I wonder why. That's kind of interesting. However, it's on Wikipedia, so I don't know how true it is, because I'm not a person that trusts Wikipedia too much. So I guess there was an update. I lied. I like that. And let me see. There's also an image of the house. I'm trying to see it better, I guess you could say. Yeah, it's definitely the house I just looked at. It is a cute house. You really wouldn't know it was haunted or had any kind of like crazy ass history like that unless you're actively trying to find it. And this reminds me of, I think it was a house when we, probably the second or third house we lived in when in the hometown that I'm from. And for some reason, my room always gave me the creeps. I'll never do any research because personally, I don't give a fuck anymore. Personally, I don't care. But there was always like a vibe in one of the rooms there. Just creepy, weird, off. The floor was like black and white tile, checkerboard style kind of shit. And I just never felt comfortable in there. It was always kind of off. That's how a house can be misleading. If anybody's ever gone, when you go house hunting, you go into other people's houses. Sometimes they still live there. Sometimes their stuff is still there. And you go in and you just get like a fucking vibe and it doesn't work with you. That's kind of how I imagine this would be like. That's creepy. I don't know how I feel about that. I definitely don't know. That's creepy. This last story, it's got me shook, honestly, to be perfectly honest. Wow. Just wow. Because it genuinely, I don't know. You know what? I'm just going to read it. And I'm not even going to fucking comment on it. My hometown loves Halloween festivals. It seems like every civic organization and business has its own little carnivals. Costume contests, cake walks, apple bobbing, the whole 9 yards. My personal favorite was always the scarecrow competition at Hidden Spring Cave Park. Until last year, that is. I don't think the town will ever host it again. Every school district and even a few businesses would create a scarecrow and enter it in the contest. Hidden Spring Cave was a local landmark in town that featured a cave, natural spring, and walking trails for the community to use. Every October, Hidden Spring would take all of the scarecrows and place them throughout the walking trails. Joggers and families out for a stroll would walk through and admire their work and creativity of each one. At the end of the trail, there was a ballot box to leave votes. Whichever scarecrow received the most votes by Halloween would be awarded $100 prize. One entry was selected by a panel of judges for the grand prize, $500, and a picture on the front page of the local paper. Last year, I was selected to sit on the judging panel. My family owned a local florist shop for decades, which I had taken over after my father retired. Most of the judges owned small local businesses. Sponsoring or volunteering was free advertising. The week before Halloween, dozens of scarecrows lined the path inside the little park. Most of the early entries were produced by the local elementary school classes. A few high school art classes would submit to a scarecrow, but I guess the older kids kind of outgrew the contest. While we didn't make our final decision for the grand prize until the day before Halloween, I would usually take a walk on the trails to check the new entries each day. Most of them were your run-of-the-mill scarecrows, straw hats, old plaid shirt, and work gloves. A few others were low effort with t-shirts and Halloween masks. The standout that year was entered by James Sterling, a local dermatologist, well thought of in the community, but rarely seen in public. His wife had an affair and left him earlier in the year. The once vibrant man became a recluse. As I strolled the path, I saw his name on the sign below one of the scarecrows. It made me happy for a moment to see he was getting out and about again. My happiness turned to discomfort when I saw the scarecrow. It was too well made. The skin was made of rough burlap, and it clung to the frame beneath to an almost perfect face. The sharp cheekbones sat beneath black button eyes. The arms and legs stretched to a T that made me feel as though I was looking at a crucifixion. The clothes were also a bit strange. Stretched over the anatomical frame were a blue silk blouse and a pair of white clam digger pants. Both were in excellent condition and seemed too nice to use for a project like this. As I walked away, it almost seemed to watch me as I left. The figure haunted my mind for the rest of the day. I loved the scarecrows on the trail, but Dr. Sterling's entry was too realistic for my comfort. As the days passed, the burlap effigy only became more disturbing. Scarecrow wasn't an apt name for it. The figure seemed to do the exact opposite. When I would pull into the parking lot for the next few days, swarms of birds would be circling over the woods ahead of me. Just a handful on the first day, but by the second and third, there were dozens. They swooped and circled above the trails. Dozens sat perched in the trees lining the entrance to the trails. Caws and shrieks filled the air, piercing the usual serene atmosphere of the park. Crows, ravens maybe, I couldn't tell. Flat, black, hateful birds, whatever they were. I was nervous to walk past or below them. They would cry out wildly and flutter their wings any time someone walked nearby. On the trail, it became even worse. The farther I made it in, the thicker the flock of birds grew. If you couldn't see them, you could hear their hateful racket. It was almost as if they were waiting to strike. My heart pounded, and I felt the fear of a small child lost in the woods. Dr. Sterling's scarecrow was the pinnacle of the dark visitors. The outstretched arms and the head of the dummy were covered in the damn creatures. They perched in a neat line, some cawed, while others pecked increasingly at the ragged burlap face. If you drew too close to the scarecrow, the birds would flap their wings or take flight, darting above your head. A few would swoop so closely you could feel the wind rustle through your hair. A chorus of evil things would cry out from the trees until you moved away. And there was that stench. It was that fetid smell of decomposition. The cluster of obsidian birds must have killed something in the woods nearby. I had never been one to pay much attention in biology class, but I always thought crows and ravens were carrion birds. Maybe they were hunters. I couldn't have been sure. For the smell to be that intense, they would have had to kill something nearby. Trail walkers were at an all-time low that year. I don't know if it was the birds, the smell, or the disturbing scarecrow. My guess was a combination of the three. Something had to be done. I called a few of the judges to share my concerns about the disturbing scarecrow and the birds, but their responses shocked me. Most of them were equally disturbed by Dr. Sterling's creation, thought it was the best one in the contest. Yes, they agreed, it was off-putting, but there was no reason to not consider it. Before I could even recommend its removal, they stated their intentions to vote it in the grand prize winner. At a last-ditch effort, I tried calling Dr. Sterling himself. Every time I called his office, the automated voicemail system would pick up. I left a few messages and even called the emergency number, but never received a call back from him. On Halloween Day, I arrived at Hidden Springs and parked my car in the tiny lot. The other judges were waiting at the trailhead, and I joined them. We talked amongst ourselves as we began to walk through the path and jotted notes with our clipboards. We were the only ones on the trail. The flock of birds was as thick as I'd ever seen them. Occasionally, I would jump or stumble as one darted above our heads aggressively. The other judges reacted similarly, but no one verbalized their obvious concern. Shrieks and caws filled our ears as we neared the midway point of the trail. Dr. Sterling's scarecrow came into view. It was covered with crows. The blue blouse hung in tatters, revealing the disturbingly accurate burlap torso beneath. Ragged swaths of cloth dangled from the face as the birds pecked madly. As we grew closer, the murder of crows bolted from the scarecrow's limbs and landed in the trees. They cried out towards us, but kept their distance. Most of Dr. Sterling's creation was in ruins, mauled and shredded by the hateful creatures. We all stood before the scarecrow. Our banter disappeared completely as we looked on. With most of the burlap peeled away, the frame beneath was now visible. Shredded flesh flopped away from the white plastic mannequin head below. Crusted blood covered the underside of the skin. The crime scene technicians removed the scarecrow from the trail within 15 minutes of our call. Detectives questioned us for hours, but none of us had any useful information to give them. Dr. Sterling's scarecrow had been there for nearly a week, and none of us were there when he had put it out. According to the newspapers, in the following weeks, the search of his house produced an abundance of information, but nothing led to his whereabouts. Most of his clothing and all of his identification were gone. He had left his dog with a neighbor, saying he had to travel out of town for business. He hasn't been seen since. The last thing they found was an old chest in the freezer in the basement. It was chained and padlocked, but the officers made short work of it with a pair of bolt cutters. When they opened the lid, they found what was left of Mrs. Sterling. Wow. Just wow. I don't think I really have any words for that. That is pretty fucking creepy and creative, and I don't know that it's true because, we're on Reddit, and Reddit is its own little monster. But if it's true, that's definitely a fucked up way to go. I don't know, I think it must have been like one hell of a fight. I wonder if she came back for her stuff and that's when he decided it was time to take her ass out. I guess we'll never know, because it's Reddit. As you guys already know, at this point, I'm always going to put the suicide and crisis hotline at the end of every single episode because it means so much to me. If you're feeling suicidal or have suicidal ideation, call or text 988. They're open 24/7, 365 days a year. They're ready to help you, especially if you need somebody to talk to in that moment. I'd also like to add that I deeply appreciate everybody who's listening to these podcast episodes because I work so hard on them every single week. I basically work 2 full-time jobs at this point, and it makes me happy to know that there are people who are listening, so thank you. And you can find me on social media at AlexAgain on Instagram and paranormalartist.podcast, also on Instagram. YouTube and TikTok, Paranormal Artist Podcast. And if you have any spooky stories or encounters that you would like to share, you can email me at paranormalartistpodcast@gmail.com. I'd also like to add that I have a Patreon set up for the podcast. For just $2 a month, you can help the podcast become something even better than what it currently is.